Lights everywhere.
All right.
Yay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so this is the kickoff of an interview series that I've been wanting to do for a while, and your presence has always been an inspiration. The purpose of our getting together today and this dialogue series that I'm hoping kind of grows is to really bring to the fore a range of diverse voices around the sustainability economy and environmental justice and social impact and really what solutions are out there. Like the green economy, I think there's like a solutions economy. And, just given everything going on, in 2017, climate change, we have water issues, we have drought issues, we have lots of different things going on. And underneath all of that, we know we have racism and economic divide and all of these other things. And so I think it's really important for, us to stay focused on where the solutions are and know that there really are, some warriors out there and some powerful, diverse leaders who, are holding the fort, such as yourself. So Donna Hope is an environmental warrior, eco-justice warrior, focusing on energy efficiency and sustainability, environmental rehab, sustainability policy with the city of New York. Lots of different things that you have had your hand in, and you come also from, a very illustrious educational background, HBCUs, woo woo. Spellman in the house, holding it down.
In the house.
All right, and Rensselaer Polytech, which, I feel proud of personally because in addition to you being a dear family member, alumni, I have a brother who is also an alumni of RPI, so I know how you all do.
Hey.
And, it's just really great to talk with you and to hear what you're working on right now, which I know has a lot to do with diversity in the field of environmental development, environmental sciences, sustainability, eco-justice. So why don't you share a little bit about what you're working on?
Yeah, thanks for that introduction. So should I skip the history? Because that alone is like 15 minutes. So just go into right now, the present.
Start with where you are right now, and then you can tell us a little bit about how you got there.
Great. So I'm a freelance consultant on sustainability, energy efficiency, and always with a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. And my current client, my main client right now is working with the JPB Foundation based in Midtown Manhattan. They have a 3-tier focus on health, medical issues and health and medical research, on poverty elimination, and on deep environmental justice issues. So my specific role is consulting with the Environment Department and assisting their grantees formally who were supporting the Clean Power Plan.
Oh, very controversial subject matter right now.
I'm just launching right into it. Because for those who know, with the current administration, one of the first acts of injustice that this new administration is doing is trying to dismantle the Clean Power Plan and all of its wonderful tenets of protecting our earth, land, air, and water.
Let's break that down. Yeah, because the Clean Power Plan, I think it's one of those nebulous policies out there that if you're not, in an industry that's really dealing with it, you may not know what it is. So can you share just maybe a breakdown a little bit about what it is?
Well, what was brilliant about it is that it was an amendment to a pre-existing legislation that has been around for several administrations. In fact, under the Nixon administration, Nixon actually formed the agency, Environmental Protection Agency, and Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act, which as the title is self-explanatory, was literally there to put in protections about us having access to clean water and clean air.
But apparently different people have very, very vastly different concepts of what clean actually means. I don't know.
Right. Clean should mean, like, you could drink the water, it's potable. You could fish in the water and not die of whatever contaminants the fish have been exposed to. You can exist and not worry about the acid rain that's falling on you. You can literally breathe the air and not have to be shepherded off to the emergency room of the hospital. There's some sort of basic things.
Yeah.
There's basic things about what that means, what that entails.
Human living. Okay. Yeah.
Human living and for the general ecosystem. And so what that meant was, for example, you can't just dump your toxic effluent into that waterway. Industrial sector, you can't just spew whatever pollutants out of your smokestack. Utility sector, because that in turn will come down and affect the ecosystem, the people, the planet. So the details of how to get clean air and clean water are not so easy, but this act established sort of basic fundamentals of our inalienable rights to access to these things. The new administration does not agree that these are inalienable rights and in fact put corporate interests above these rights. And so we're doing things like saying, oh yes, that industry can dump toxic waste right into your waterways. And yes, we don't have to regulate whatever toxic emissions are coming out of your smokestack utilities, for example. Yes, we can reinvigorate the fossil fuel industries and extraction and mining and drilling and fracking, no matter what the consequences are on human health and welfare and that of animals and plants. So it's very unfortunate.
Are they rolling back all the way back to Nixon, or are they rolling back the portion that Obama rolled out in, I think, 2016?
Right. So the amendment, the Clean Power Plan, otherwise known as 111D, because that's how far embedded it is into the existing act, was specifically about development of new power plants, and said that they have to come on board with more stringent emission standards, and that there needs to be a general reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. When we're talking about greenhouse gases, we're talking about your methane, your carbon dioxide. But in particular, the Clean Power Plan was looking at carbon dioxide greenhouse gas emissions, and saying that there has to be a significant reduction of these emissions by a target year around the country, and that in order to do that, each state, all 50 states, had to come up with their own individualized plan called the State Implementation Plan, which gave the state sort of autonomy on how to do that, but the end result was a reduction. So one, you have to establish a baseline on what your current levels were, and then you have to have a reduction of that by a certain time. And that there were other incentives that were put in to involve usually the communities that are most impacted but least interacted with in terms of involvement, and so that's our low-income communities and our communities of color. So there were other incentives that were also introduced into this plan that said, you get extra points for doing that. So it wasn't a requirement, but it was certainly a step in the right direction in terms of really bringing everyone to the table.
Interesting. So at that time there was also, I know that involves, for instance, a movement towards incorporating more renewable energy among the states, energy plans, the mix of energy use that their utility providers had to purchase from to generate that energy across the state. But you're saying also that there were efforts to bring in communities to have dialogue around in what way were they trying to engage communities in this kind of energy discussion?
Well, what it was acknowledging is that, as I mentioned, the disproportionately most impacted communities were the ones who were disenfranchised and not part of the planning process. One, of the policies that were enacted to even put them in harm's way, and two, part of the solution when coming to the table about what can be done. So the incentive said, if you make a concerted effort but direct outreach, direct training, direct engagement in these communities of color and these low-income communities and the indigenous tribal communities that are most impacted by these pollutants. One, you're going to have a more robust plan that actually is going to be actionable and equitable, but also you get sort of extra incentive points.
With the state energy plan.
With the state implementation plan, that's right.
Okay, so the state kind of going out to communities.
Right. So this is for utility companies to really, a lot of times you'll hear about town hall meetings or community board meetings or public service commission meetings, and the communities that they're talking about are not even present because they haven't been told, they haven't been informed, and they haven't been invited. So they said, one, that's not right, because if we're talking about a just transition, you have to have the people present who actually are affected and a lot of times have ideas of some solutions or want to be involved. Because a lot of the solutions presented involve jobs. They involve job transitions, getting off of fossil fuels into renewable energy. They involve training. They involve outreach. They involve education. And how are you having these conversations and not having the very community members who are most impacted in the room? So it said, we need to acknowledge that. One of the criticisms of the plan was that this wasn't mandatory. It was an incentive, but every little motivation helps. So it was a step in the right direction.
And did you see some positive examples of that anywhere specifically?
Several states really made strides, particularly because as the Clean Power Plan was introduced, there was some local legislation changes in some places where, like Louisiana, for example, that is plagued with all sorts of climate change issues, is still reeling after Katrina and several other environmental devastations of offshore drilled spills and all sorts of devastations, had a transition with a new governor that said, you know what, we are committed to doing more to clean about a more just transition in the energy sector, in investments in renewable energy, in engaging with local communities. Local communities, we're talking about your faith and religious organizations. We're talking about your local community and youth-led organizations, your nonprofits. The thing where people are when we say community and frontline organizations, people who are literally in the forefront, who are most impacted, most disenfranchised, but and many times most knowledgeable about what's really going on and have ideas about how to bring about change.
Well, it's really interesting that you say that because I just came across the other day some information about the mayor's office in New Orleans and their kind of sustainability platform down there, which I hadn't really seen too much about previously, so I was surprised.
Right.
And so it's actually, it's really great to hear your perspective on where the governor has taken things or is going to take things. That's definitely a positive shift, and as you know, it's a home state of mine, and it's really hard to see how the environmental degradation impacts the economy, impacts the food system, impacts public health, impacts poverty and farming. My goodness, it's still an agricultural state in a lot of ways, and seafood included in that. And so the impact is very great, very vast. And so New Orleans has their city has a sustainability platform that's engaging local communities. And I'm not sure the extent to which that they're really delving into some of the social justice challenges in New Orleans, specifically around integration and segregation in the communities. Economic segregation, and a lot of the ways that, as you're talking about, decisions get made without people at the table. I know that that's been a struggle down there, for instance, in the education side of things. And so, however, to see the platform there is really a positive thing, and I know that there are organizations that are striving to bring players to the table. But I do think as you're saying, it's still a challenge to see where the successes in terms of really having diverse voices that are leading community transformation around energy use, around emissions, recycling, these sorts of things, which is key, as you're saying. So,
Yeah.
in terms of the new administration and kind of the mood having shifted a good deal in the energy space, the policy space. For instance, the Clean Power Plan was also really important in the sense that it was supposed to link the U.S. up to the Paris Climate Agreement. And our commitments on an international stage, in terms of, presuming some level of leadership around, addressing some of the challenges of climate change. And, there's a lot of criticism. There's still criticism around the effectiveness of a lot of the goals adopted from that international agreement, and including the U.S.'s pledges. Nevertheless, there were pledges. There were goals established. Now, those goals also, extend out over a period of time based on a lot of the states, right? And, that time period could go out past, 2018, 2019, where we'll start to see probably some political rumblings going on. Do you think that there's resilience enough in the move towards sustainability so far that we can kind of weather the storm over the next couple of years? What do you see as some of the bright spots or even the challenges right now?
There was last year at COP21 there was 2 years ago now, 2015, there was a tremendous amount of hope that was generated because of the ratification of the Paris Agreement and the United States commitment to it, where before the United States had not committed to doing anything, and was in denial about its huge role in shifting climate change. So it was, it was monumental to have the U.S. sign on to over 100 other countries around the world to recognize their role in climate change and to say that they would do significant and impactful measures to mitigate their climate change contributions. Yes, extremely disheartening to now have an administration that is literally completely flipped in their messaging, in not acknowledging not only the United States' role, but any anthropogenic role at all in climate change. And not only saying that they won't do anything, but rolling back a lot of measures like your car exhaust emissions. I mean, this should just be basic knowledge that you have millions and millions of vehicles in the car on the road that are emitting emissions. You just go travel to any other place that doesn't have these emission standards, and you cannot breathe. And you have the gasoline, the diesel gas, and the other unfiltered gasoline and oils that they're using in the vehicles, just spewing out the most toxic emissions. You literally can't breathe because it's right there on ground level. This is just basic understanding. I mean, you just have to think about the very recent lawsuit settlement that Volkswagen had to do because they were right on their emission standards. I mean, this is huge, and they understood that this was huge, and they had a huge penalty to pay, and are continuing, I think, to figure out that litigation. But to have an entire federal level administration that is doing everything in its power to dismiss the very real impacts that we have on climate change that affect us immediately is baffling, it's irrational, and it's irresponsible.
Yeah. Well, I think that's where things start to feel pretty challenging, pretty overwhelming. But I think that what's been interesting about the past few years is that there's been a lot of these commitments made, and that's, I think, true for governments, whether that's some municipalities. We know that there are some a few bright spots here and there. Mm-hmm. And some larger organizations, corporations, some major NGOs and nonprofits that are still kind of really trying to make sure that things move along in the same direction, or at least maintain the commitments that they have. Mm-hmm. But in terms of incorporating the diversity angle in all of that,
yep.
It seems like when there's a lot of pressure to cut back, a lot of squeeze. Maybe there might be coming squeezes on funding, right, from public sources certainly, and then also potentially from private sources. Do you think that, diversity is going to remain a top of mind issue for, in the environmental movement? And, who's really holding the fort on that?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked. I think that with a lot of the social and racial justice movements that were happening, like Movement for Black Lives, for example, or all the visibility that was happening around the Dakota Access Pipeline and Standing Rock, people really were coming to the forefront in these communities of color and saying that, one, these are injustices that have happened for a very long time.
Yes.
Two, they need to be talked about very openly. And three, the intersection of these justice movements needs to be recognized, because these struggles on the basis of class and race and gender, environment, social justice, equity, these things are interrelated, and you can no longer separate them and just think that you can focus on one and address it and not and leave out the other aspects that are contributing to the oppression. So environmental justice is certainly being used a lot more as a term. Whether people quite fully understand it, I'm not sure. For example, if you go on some of the nonprofits or some of the frontline communities that are working on it, they very clearly say that we are talking about targeted, intentional, disproportionate oppression towards communities of color, environmental devastation. You go on some of the government agencies, for example, and it might say environmental justice has to deal with equal access for all, regardless of race, for the environment and health. It's wording, it might be semantics, but I think it's important to really use the words that we're talking about, because environmental justice is really about the response and eradication of environmental racism. And this is directly related to very intentional, targeted, institutional racism from specific policies and practices that affected communities of color directly. So there have always been organizations that have worked on this for quite some time, and there are more organizations that are at least acknowledging that it needs to be worked on. I think they're trying to do it right. So they say, well, we recognize that this has been an ongoing movement. We are not the forebearers of, but we want to support, particularly for nonprofits and those that seek funding from philanthropy. More funders who are more socially conscious, like the one that I work for, Jacob B. Foundation, they specifically want to fund efforts that deal with these inequities. So one of my advisory positions is a climate equity advisor for the nonprofit Demos. And Demos is based in Manhattan and does fantastic work on a number of economic equity policy spheres. And they're starting to realize that what was missing was the climate equity aspect. And while we're just still forming the committee and really fleshing out like the real involvement that Demos will have in the fight, one of the things they acknowledge is that they want to use their influence and their media access that they have to support ongoing initiatives and organizations that have been doing this that haven't necessarily been getting, like you said, they haven't necessarily been getting the attention they deserve. But what I really love is their, and I just want to read something that they have, sort of a definition of what they say climate equity is. They say ensuring that a clean economy transformation provides fair access to new capital investment, job creation, and enterprise growth in low-income communities and communities of color. The inclusion of these communities in public policies and economic growth which address the climate and inequality crisis. So we're talking about a new movement. This is like a new, complete, deep dive into the current economic sphere that we're experiencing, the market forces that are moving capitalism right now, which leave swaths of the population out that are most disenfranchised, marginalized, and disproportionately affected by environmental devastation. We have to say not only are we bringing them to the forefront for the decision making, but we're talking about clean job transition. We're talking about building up the education, the outreach capacity, the voices of the marginalized, bringing people to the forefront, decentering whiteness, and bringing together people of color, indigenous people who have always been disenfranchised and most impacted by environmental devastation, and moving this movement forward in a more holistic, integrated, intersectional way. This is deep. This is what we need to be talking about, and this is how we need to be talking about it.
That is amazing, and I love that they're bringing in the economic perspective, because I think that's really central to how marginalized communities are. That's central to our lens. How folks think through the challenges that they're facing. And it's oftentimes the barriers to maybe what might ostensibly be solutions. You gotta have to deal with the economic challenges alongside it. But I think it indicates, though, that there's significant opportunity. I was just reading up about Akon's foundation, Akon Solar, I think is the name. And, basically they are doing a really, pretty widespread set of projects, distributing solar power kits for public lighting and in-home lighting throughout Western Africa. And they're up to like 20-something countries, it looks like. Wow. Now, I don't know, what their real impact is, and that's actually something I'd like to see more of, transparency around on their website and things like that. But the idea that, okay, this is a brother, from the continent who was like, what, we can fill in the gap. We can fill in the gaps with clean energy, with opportunities that are going to create jobs for youth. They're bringing youth into the system, into the network there. Educational opportunities and all sorts of things. So, they seem to be really taking up or creating a model that, I think is something that we can learn here and apply here in a lot of ways. I know that there are different efforts to, get solar into low-income communities, things like that can result in also, as you were saying, clean jobs. But clean jobs can be a wide range of things. When you're talking about environmental consciousness and bringing that into the workplace, I think that can look a lot of different ways for folks. Why don't you, can you describe, maybe a couple of different examples of, some of those types of jobs, some of those solutions that you're seeing out there?
Yeah, actually, one of the upcoming projects that I have, as I mentioned, I'm freelance, another contract that I'm working on is with a division of the Department of Energy, their National Renewable Energy Lab, or otherwise known as NREL. So they do a tremendous amount of R&D, research and development around wind technology. So solar, as you mentioned, I think has been having fantastic strides, both in like the photovoltaic cell actually like development and how it's just become a lot more affordable. The cells and panels are smaller, more portable, more powerful. You don't need nearly as big a square footage area as you used to get more power, and how they're able to convert that sunlight into energy is much more efficient. They're doing a lot of community solar and net metering projects where you could have like a centralized solar panel field that can access whole communities. I mean, there's just tremendous strides. And then in terms of the job force end, there's been, I think, some really great movement in solar in terms of recruitment in diverse communities, but not so much on wind. And I find that interesting. So NREL contacted me and said they have a collegiate wind competition that they've been doing for the last few years, and they have all sorts of other related initiatives. And they noticed that it just wasn't diverse enough. That the colleges, even if the college population themselves were racially or ethnic diverse, the actual competitors in this competition were not. And they said, we were wondering if you could help us, one, disseminate the information to your networks, like your historically black colleges and universities, your other minority-serving universities, but also just maybe help us figure out how we could sort of bridge this divide. And first, it went from just forward this to my networks. I said, you know what? There's a deeper engagement, deeper connection that can be had here if we think about this a little more holistically. And I said, how about we do a deeper dive? And I know in this political climate, everyone's worried about defunding, and this is very real. I said, but before that happens, if it does, let's do as much work as we can, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done in WinTech. And so now what it's become is going to be a deep dive assessment of sort of diversity and outreach efforts that they've attempted through interviews of their staff and stakeholders, sort of putting together best practices. And then I'm actually going to be presenting with another freelance consultant on diversity at their collegiate wind competition conference that they're having Earth Day weekend. Oh, wow. So this is great because it's like what became just an initial sort of quick, I don't know, can you just do something fast so we could check a diversity box, to them acknowledging like, no, in order for the movement, the bigger movement, to really have some authentic progress, there has to be deeper engagement. Yeah. And that why WinTech is so great is, one, the new head of the Department of Energy Administration, who was a former governor of Texas. What a lot of people don't know is that Texas exponentially has much more investment in WinTech than any other state in America.
Yeah,
I mean, exponential.
I read that the other day.
That's right. And that Governor Perry does get a lot of credit for that, whether he wants to acknowledge it or not. So we said, well, let's go with that. Like, he's coming in and sure, maybe there's some climate change denying and he wants to cut some programs, but WinTech, we believe that he's a fan. So we, and with NREL's National Wind Technology Center being right in Colorado, they're right in the wind belt where there is already some fantastic wind farms that exist on land, but there's also some on our coasts, some fantastic new projects that are in development. Right here in New York, the Long Island Power Authority and Governor Cuomo just approved what will be the largest offshore wind farm development in the country. I mean, it's going to be tremendous. And they're now just going forward with figuring out how to install it, how to put it in, but it's been approved. This is going to be...
How large is large?
Right, the largest in the country. I can give you stats and figures later. I can't do it off the top of my head.
You can Google it later.
Right. I'm just curious. But major megawattage.
Yeah.
And so what's great about WindTech is that it's just like solar. You're talking on so many different sectors. People might just think one thing, but you have your engineers, and even in engineering, you have several different disciplines that can be involved in this technology, and your architects in terms of design, and your electricians and your manufacturers in utility alone, because they're still going to use pre-existing utility lines to distribute that energy once it's generated from the wind turbines. You're talking about sales force development, outreach and engagement. There's literally almost every sector that you can imagine is involved in WindTech and making it successful. And so we were also trying to help them see that, this is a very broad movement that intersects with several different sectors, that the outreach for diversity is tremendous, and that the country, over, again, several bipartisan administrations, has already been investing in WindTech. Billions of dollars of our economy has already been invested in it because it's a good economy builder. So, we said, this new administration, they might be denying some things about climate change, but if we just look on the basis of economics, it just makes economic sense.
Well, what would you say to, entering freshman at an HBCU, for instance?
Yes.
In terms of, how to think through, what's some good foundational steps for them to consider if they want to explore this industry?
And this is exactly what we need to be talking about. Another initiative that I'm a part of, did you notice I have several jobs, is I'm a partner of an initiative called the HBCU Green Fund.
Yes.
HBCU standing for Historically Black Colleges and Universities. And this is an initiative to build up, on a student and alum level, very interactive, very engaging, to build up the endowment of our HBCUs, to do deep dive energy, water retrofits, retro commissioning, renovations on campus, and engaging the student, staff, faculty, admin, and also local contractors.
Love it.
And also because a lot of our HBCUs don't have a geoscience or sustainability or environmental curriculum at all, so also to help engage with that development.
Yes.
So all those things. So, one, just being present on the campuses and seeing things like renewable energy investments, maybe a wind turbine installed on campus, solar panels on campus, maybe a new building is now LEED certified, or a building has been renovated. Like in my alma mater, Spelman College, one of the oldest buildings from the 1800s was renovated and is now LEED certified as one of the most energy efficient buildings in the country. To say, like, this is possible. We are literally invested in it. This is why it's important. And these are the jobs that make this sort of development possible. And we need people on campus who care and can help us sustain the sustainability. It will lead to, maybe if your campus didn't have an environmental club, maybe this will lead to having an environmental club. Because versus the people who are interested, they want to know about job creation, there's ample jobs that are available in STEM, but not just in the STEMs. But I always like to advocate for the STEMs, particularly for our young girls.
That's right. That's right.
To get into the science, technology, engineering, and math, this is what we need to keep the renewable energy going and to the technology to advance.
Absolutely. Oh, I love this. I love the HBCU Green Fund initiative.
Yay.
It's super amazing, and I definitely encourage anyone who's listening to check it out. And can anyone support, or do you have to be an alum?
Well, what we are trying to do, and we're building this up right now, is we're going to have a whole mobile app that's going to be available where anyone can pledge money, like $10, and you could it'll be a whole online social media campaign. You could say, I pledge my 10 or something, and we're going to get, celebrities involved, and the presidents of HBCUs, and the heads of the environmental clubs, and that the idea is that it starts sort of as this grassroots movement in the HBCUs, but there's matching from philanthropy and others who are literally invested in supporting our HBCUs. Because, one of the movements that's happening in terms of intersection and acknowledgement is that a lot of the predominantly white institutions, Ivy League institutions, owe their tremendous endowments to their investments in slavery.
Hello.
So there's a lot of conversations that are happening on college campuses around the country, including Harvard and Yale and Columbia and Georgetown. The list goes on, that says, yes, one, we acknowledge that we are deeply rooted in the slave trade, and that the profits from that are one of the reasons that we have literally billions of dollars in our endowments, where you can put together like the top 10 HBCUs, and it won't even come close to the endowment of one of the Ivy League institutions. So we're having these, it's like, what does reparations look like?
Don't even get me
like for us to talk about our involvement in the slave trade and what we're going to do about that? What does it mean when we talk about investment in our HBCUs? This was also an executive order that the last administration had to acknowledge that investing in HBCUs is important and critical to the American education system. There was recently a convening of HBCUs with the new administration. It did not go very well. It seemed more like a photo opportunity than a real deep dive engagement or acknowledgement of the institutions. Were you present for that engagement? No, these are the presidents. So there's some 80-something HBCU presidents that went and met with DJT and some other administrators and
advisors.
It didn't. There was a lot of disappointment, I'll say. A lot of disappointment.
I heard it was actually rather confrontational in some ways, and a sense that, maybe if everything is shrinking, then, that's just, you have to just suck it up. I think there's a sense of that throughout the administration. So I can imagine that it might have been a tense conversation, but I hope that they are weathering the storm and finding ways to, work effectively so that, things like this can get ahead. There's a lot of investment that needs to be made in the HBCU system because, folks have been operating pretty threadbare in some areas, but that's a part of the larger economic circumstances in which a lot of these schools exist. If you look at Spelman, it's in a mecca. Spelman and Morehouse happen to be in an urban environment with pretty dynamic economy and black economy specifically as well.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously they have a long history, but a lot of these schools are in very rural areas.
Mm-hmm.
And I bet in many ways they also could acutely benefit from some of the environmental programs and opportunities, curriculum development, as you were mentioning, and dealing with things like agriculture, things like forestry management. I think that there is often a misplaced memory around how communities of color interact with rural environments, because there's so often this focus on the urban and the plight of the urban economy and urban communities, but in reality also rural communities are facing it just as bad. And I think that's also what's why a lot of this political divide has come up. That's been all overanalyzed to the nth degree, but the same is true for a lot of communities of color. And I think the schools bear the brunt of that local economic stagnation probably in a lot of ways. I think it's so important, right, that we think through how, economic factors can interact with things like the energy sector. I mean, you're talking about business management across the board. And so that's another area, too, that young students can look into. I happen to kind of work more in the business and sustainability side of things. And, I'm always really interested in how small businesses are finding ways to be more energy efficient, to recycle, to compost, to, be fair employers, right? All of these sorts of things. And I think it's really important for a lot of students of color to be thinking in an innovative way about how they might approach doing business, because I think that there is a good opportunity out there. And there's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit coming through, college-age students for good reason. And so I definitely would recommend thinking through that too. How can you work with engineers, and your tech folks to create solutions, whether that's consumer goods or or other forms of business services, things like that, and think about it from a sustainability perspective. I think we really have to come at it from a full spectrum.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I have one last question to ask you before we wrap up. And who is your energy muse, or your environmental muse right now, your environmental justice muse?
My environmental justice muse.
Yeah, your inspiration,
I take inspiration from a lot of different sources. So unfortunately, this is not going to be like a one-person answer. I'm going to go back to my first inspiration when I was 11, and my mother took me to a talk to see one of the first black female engineers who had started her own consulting firm that was for environmental consulting, Dr. Lilia Abron, who is still practicing her peer consulting business in D.C.
Wow.
And I remember being so impressed at that young age that I shyly, spoke with her afterwards and said, I'm so inspired and I would like to do what you do, and she gave me her card and wrote her home number on the back and was like, call me, keep in touch. And I was like, oh. And right then, at 11, I was like, I'm going to be an environmental engineer. I don't even know what that means, but this woman was amazing, and it's about the earth and it sounds cool.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so I say, hey, always inspire the children, because you never know what you do, what your actions, your thoughts, your involvements, how it can transform someone. And, I had many inspirations after that along the way. I had the pleasure of meeting Majora Carter many years ago, soon after she had started Sustainable South Bronx, and before she'd gone on to the Majora Carter Group, and now just doing all the things.
Yes.
And she's a tremendous inspiration in terms of, saying, even acknowledging that she didn't start off as an environmentalist. She was just really concerned and disturbed by her own environmental living conditions in the South Bronx.
Concerned citizenry. Okay, we can do it. Right?
We can
All
do
it
it.
takes is, lifting a voice, identifying the issue, and making it known that you
That's great.
care. Making it known that you care.
Yeah. And on from there, it's not even necessarily people who are like in the environmental movement. It could just be artists who speak out about environmental devastation in their own way, like Esperanza Spalding, who is a fantastic artist who used her voice and her music to really spread the concerns about justice, the intersection of justice, and how we have to do everything possible, even if it's a little thing. You think it's a little thing. That goes a long way to inspiring others and to making an impact. Because when you multiply that little one thing that you do by the millions and then billions of other people who do that one thing, then that's when we're talking about real transformation. So, I take inspiration from wherever I can get it.
Yes. Oh, wow. Now, Dr. Abrams, is that who you mentioned?
Lily Ebron. Yeah.
Ebron, Lily Ebron.
Abron.
Oh man, did you meet her again? Like, have you spoken with
her?
I'm
actually reaching out and trying to reach her. I should probably make a more concerted effort, but I've sent her some like email and social media messages. But I would love to see her again.
Amazing.
Let her know, like,
what a beautiful
you inspire little 11-year-old me.
Awesome. Well, we can. Yes, we can do all of that. Okay, so thank you so much, Donna, for joining me. And we got a video.
Yes, technologies.
So, all right. I will talk to you again soon, and we'll check out who we get on next. I definitely want to talk to more folks who are doing work like you, or the folks who are doing work in sustainability, environmental justice, and a wide range of sustainability issues. Let's make it happen on Green.
You know what, Tom? How silly. There's one last shout out that we didn't do, and we're both involved in it. And you see I might have added another new sticker. We are both leaders of the Environmental Professionals of Color networking group for New York City.
I'm so glad that you mentioned this.
I was like, how could I get off this interview and not even mention that? So EPOC, Environmental Professionals of Color, which is a networking group program of the parent organization Center for Diversity and the Environment, based in Portland, Oregon. And there are over, at this point, probably 800 members in chapters around the country, including Portland, Seattle, LA, Kansas City, DC, and of course New York, as Sal and I help lead the chapter, and it provides a safe space for networking, outreach, for community building, network building, skill sharing, and you don't necessarily have to be employed, even the professionals in the title, but for people of color who are interested in the environmental fields and sustainability and just want to be connected. It's great for students, not even college. You could be high school students who just want to be connected and network to others who we talk about mentorship and those who can really help continue to inspire us to get involved and stay engaged.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you gave that shout out. And we are going to keep building this diverse network of folks who are, environmentally conscious and socially conscious, because we are out there and, we have solutions. This is the thing. We can make this happen. We're going to make this happen, but we just have to come together and keep identifying the opportunities. So thank you.
Opportunities abound, so they're all around us. That's right.
We have to work together. I mean, that's ultimately the name of the game.
Yes, we
collaborate.
That's right.
I'll talk to you again soon, and you have a great
day.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.